Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and man, I am so excited about what we're about to talk about today and who you're going to hear from. I want to just encourage you. There's so many people that think the next generation is falling by the wayside or walking away from the church. And sure, in some of the data, it shows up that there are people walking away from the church. Many of the cases, though, is that the next generation has never properly even heard the gospel. They've not even heard the invitation. They're not just walking away because they've heard it and they've rejected it. So many in this new generation don't even know what Christ talks about, don't even know what the Christian life is. And here at Q Ideas, we've been investing in the next generation, and some of you have been helping us do that. Thank you. The churches that support us, many of you who donate and support our work at QIdeas.org, you're helping us reach the next generation. Just a few weeks ago, we hosted our first Next Gen Summit, and we brought 200 leaders together, ages 16 to 30 years old, who are leading in every area of culture. They're young. Many of them, they're athletes or entrepreneurs or have platforms of some sort of influence. And yet they wanted to come together because they want to be shaped and formed by Christian leaders who are thinking deeply about the world today, thinking deeply about the church, the culture, and what it means for us to be faithful in the midst of it. And I'll tell you, Rebecca and I went away so encouraged, tears in our eyes, as we watched another generation, because we're getting old, we're in our 40s, we're looking back and recognizing that, man, God will move in this next generation. We pray even more than in our generation. And to start to witness it and see it and taste and see the hunger, the palpable desire for God's presence, for his move in their own lives, in our world, in our culture, and everywhere that he's called them in their generation, mixed with them hearing the hardest hitting truths about what we believe as Christians and how counter this is in the current world, in the current order of things, and how much courage it's going to take and boldness and true witness to what we believe to be true, even when it flies in the face of the current norms and the current conversations that are happening. And this group was so hungry for that, so hungry, so surrendered, so trusting God with what he's given them in terms of any type of influence or opportunity, and wanting to surrender and submit all of that to his authority and walk in that freedom. And I'm telling you, it was a beautiful thing that God's birthing. And so I just want to encourage those of you listening, maybe you have kids in college, maybe you're not seeing this quite yet, but I want to tell you, people are seeing it. The leaders that we had come in and mentor, we had John Mark Comer and Jenny Allen and Jonathan Pokluda and so many others that came in and gave witness to what they were experiencing too as they watched this next gen. Justin Giboney was a part of this, talking about politics. We talked about polarization with Sho Baraka, some of the people that have been around Q forever. Andy Crouch was weighing in on teaching this next gen how to think well about culture. It was all this information that I wish I had heard 20 years ago. And now they're getting to hear it. So God is up to something really unique in this generation. And the conversation you're going to hear today was a really long setup, because I really want you to, as you listen to this conversation, I want you to understand that Luke LeFevre, who's about to be interviewed and was part of our latest Culture Summit, he represents hundreds, if not thousands, of others in his generation with a level of passion, concern, thoughtfulness, and boldness and courage that is going to be needed in our world in the days ahead. And so in this conversation, Grant Skeldon, who's our Next Gen director at Q Ideas, leads this conversation with Luke, and we get into his story and what it has meant for him to lead a movement here in the Nashville area, and with his new organization he founded called Revival Coalition, which focuses on inspiring and mobilizing young adults to see this generation reached with the gospel. And he led a Gen Z gathering. So Gen Z, we're talking 24 years of age and younger, in Dallas, Texas, just a couple of weeks ago, bringing them together for a free gathering to just, again, continue to ignite in their generation something very special. And so Luke LeFevre, somebody pay attention to, but understand that God's at work. Be encouraged. Let's listen to now.
Luke, I I'm excited for these guys to hear this story, but Gabe kind of mentioned it, but could you share just a little bit of what God's doing in Nashville and what you've been privileged to be a part of?
Yeah, it's a very long story. I'll try to condense it as quick as I can, but about 18 months ago, my friend Daniel McLeod and I, Daniel's in the room here today, we heard about these high school students who had been throwing raves. And if you don't know what a rave is, it's basically where if you think of craziest college frat party you can think of, and it's high school students, and they put on dance music, throw these parties, and they had about 400 of their friends start showing up for these parties, only about 30 minutes from where we are right now here in Nashville. We heard about these raves that were taking place, and we felt like the Lord spoke to us and said, I'm going to open the door for you to preach the gospel at these raves. And we thought, there is no way Lord, how on earth would that happen? But we believe you, and we're going to take a step of faith. And so Daniel and I through a long series of events, got in contact with these students. And part of the strategy we felt like the Lord gave us was he said, I want you to reach out to another friend of ours in the city. His name's Kenny Alonzo, and he leads a ministry called Rocket Town that has a venue here. And we felt like the Lord said, ask Mr. Alonzo, who is about reaching the next generation, will you give us this venue for free as a bargaining piece to say, hey guys, we'll give you a free venue if you allow us to take the last 30 minutes of your rave to share the gospel. And Mr. Alonzo immediately says yes. And so we get into this meeting with him and we said, hey, here's the story. We said, we have a venue that can hold about 1,100 people. And we'll give it to you for free under two conditions. You give us the last 30 minutes of your rave to share about how Jesus has changed our life. And number two, you have to take all the money you would have put into paying for a venue and you have to pump it into advertising and get as many kids there as possible. So they agree. The day of the rave comes and over 1,000 high school students show up for the rave. And so we get on the platform, we share the gospel, and this was, to be clear, this was an explicit call to follow Jesus, to leave all, to forsake all, to follow Jesus. This wasn't who wants more of Jesus in your life? Do you want a little bit better, more peace in your life? Do you want a closer walk with God? This was a call to repent and follow Jesus, and when we gave the call, close to 500 high school students responded to the gospel. And out of that, we had a follow-up event planned. Daniel had started a high school ministry called Wilco United, and that was relaunched out of the gathering. The next weekend, 600 high school students show up for a worship and prayer night where the gospel was presented again, chance for follow-up. But one of the parts of this story that just even happened recently was the very first person to respond on the night of the rave was a high schooler named Jake, who was one of the two boys who had been putting on the event. And he ran across the stage and he grabbed Daniel and I and he said, today was for me. He said, my life has changed forever. And about 4 months ago, Jake was driving and he fell asleep at the wheel and Jake passed away. And his family called us and said, if we know one thing, Jake would want the gospel to be shared at his memorial service. Now, Jake was probably the most popular high school student I've ever heard of in my entire life. And at his memorial service, over 1,500 people came. And college students and high school students from all over, and the opportunity to share the gospel was given once again, and Daniel and I were given the chance to share the gospel. And when the gospel was presented again, a call to leave all and follow Jesus, the first people to respond were Jake's family and close to 500 young people responding to the gospel again. And this was just about 3 months ago.
I mean, praise God. I meet Luke and I just feel like the boldness of his confidence in the gospel just moves me. It makes me wonder. I mean, I get asked, I'm sure you get asked all the time, what do we do to reach this next generation? I mean, we got pastors and leaders in the room that might be wondering, they might be nervous, like, how do I connect? How do I relate to this next generation? How do I preach in a way that can connect? What would be your advice to them and your calling to them when they're preaching to the next generation and trying to lead them?
I think I would say a couple things. I think firstly, I think for a long time we've been asking the question, what is the next generation looking for in the church? Are they looking for authentic leaders? Are they looking for a community? Are they looking for more relevant messages? Are they looking for dynamic worship? And I believe those questions have their place, but I believe we have neglected a much more important question. And the question is not what is the next generation looking for in the church, but it is what is Jesus looking for in the next generation of his church and calling young people into it. And I'll say this, the gospel, the true gospel, the only gospel that is to call people to forsake all and follow Jesus works. It is this gospel that cut 3,000 to the heart on the day of Pentecost when Peter stood up and he presented that gospel. This is the gospel that turns cities and turns nations upside down. It's the gospel to leave all and follow Jesus. And I would say more than thinking, do we have to be relevant? The gospel is always relevant because the only thing that changes lives. And I think we have been trying to figure out, how do we get people to come? What would we say? And even when we look at the next generation in the church, we're talking about how do, with Gen Z, what do we do? We've just been talking about people outside the church, but I would say inside the church, the word says in 2 Chronicles 16:9 that the eyes of the Lord are searching to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking to show himself strong. Present tense, seeking to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are fully devoted to him. And when we look at America and people would say, is America too far gone? Is the next generation too far gone? I would say the question has never been, is it in God's plan to save America, to save a nation, to turn a nation upside down? The question is only, will he find in us that which his eyes have sought for? Hearts fully devoted. And I believe God is calling a generation to consecration, to holiness, to a life laid down on the altar before God, because that's the life that God can use. And D.L. Moody once said that the world is yet to see what God will do with the person who is wholly consecrated to God. And I believe if we can get a consecrated generation, what I think will be extremely relevant in the days ahead is calling a generation to radical holiness, to audacious faith in God. What do we really believe that God can do? And if we'll call a generation into that, I believe if we get a consecrated generation, we will get a revival generation.
So, I told you I was going to ask you one hard question I was going to surprise you with.
Okay.
I want to know what makes you feel like you're qualified to do all this. I mean, you just got married, you are young, you haven't been to seminary, you don't even work in full-time ministry. Why do you think you're qualified to do a big vision like what God's called you to?
I'd honestly say I don't think I've ever asked myself that question. But I would say the reason for it is this: we have a generation that's so badly going after this influence, and it's going after, we've lost going after Jesus. And people are like, man, Luke, you're so bold. I'm like, I'm not bold. I just feel like once you get close to God, stuff doesn't scare you.
Yeah, that's good, bro.
It's like if we are close to God, if you have Isaiah who sees God, and this man who has spent his life trying to be good and trying to follow God, and he just goes, woe is me. And it's like when you have a picture of that God, of course you believe that a nation could be turned upside down. I fully believe that we will see revival in America in our generation. And I don't think it may look like what we have thought it would. I don't think it will look like what it has looked like in the past. And I think so many people are asking, what is the method to reaching the next generation? I think of the words of E.M. Bounds, who wrote in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He said, the church has been looking for better methods, but God is looking for better men and women. Men and women of prayer, of consecration. And I think if we will come before God and we will just say, the only method that I know to reaching the next generation is to get on our face before God, to fast and to pray, to seek God, and when he speaks, obey and watch what happens. And I believe we can see a nation turned upside down.
I mean, one of the biggest things that I took from Luke is just, I feel like every generation does something. I feel like the extra generation kind of made church a little comfortable so that people would want to be there. I feel like the millennial generation went after causes. So we wanted to change the world, but we also kind of unfortunately tried to make church cool and Jesus cool. But you only make Christianity so cool. It's not supposed to be cool. When I see you, I just see you chasing after Christ, and that's what we need. That's all that we have. And last, in closing, just real quick, you got a lot of parents. Who's parents of the next generation here? You got kids that are under 30. You got a lot of parents. What would be your advice, tough love advice for how do we raise this next generation in a world that's wildly far from him and leaving the church and as dark as it is?
Yeah. Well, my mom is here, actually. She's probably going to make me cry. But my mom, she used to have something on. I'm sorry. I think she's more qualified to answer this than me. But she used to have something on our fridge growing up. And I'm going to butcher this, but it was essentially, raising the next generation is too important to leave it to chance or to believe that someone else will do a good job. My parents were tenacious with compromise in my life. They went after it. And I think we have parents, and I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to this authoritatively, but what I see so much in our generation, we've talked about how a generation is deconstructing their faith right now. And, the word says that if you train up a child in the way they should go when they are old, they will not depart from it. And while it's important to ask questions, there are lots of questions that I ask, there are lots of questions that I pursued answers to, but I don't think what we should have is a generation that's just losing their mind and going off in whatever they think that they should do, whatever compromise they think they should fall into. We should just say, oh, well, they'll figure it out eventually. I think that the most powerful discipleship structure in the world is parents. And I think if we have parents that will be tenacious of going after compromise in the lives of our kids, I think this will be the biggest key to seeing a nation turn back to God.
Can y'all get up for Luke?
Well, I knew you'd be encouraged by hearing that. I mean, it just does something to your heart to hear someone who's young really speak these truths that you've known throughout your whole life, but maybe they've grown a bit dormant. Maybe that hasn't been as fresh for you. And when he says, I believe if we get a consecrated generation, we will get a revival generation. I mean, think about the spiritual maturity of that thought, that we're not going to have revival without holiness. And to hear that spoken to the youngest of generations, to our kids, to our teenagers, to hear that courage and boldness just fires me up. I'm encouraged. I'm excited about what's coming. Now, this is one of those conversations, again, everything that you hear on this podcast, you can watch it. You can watch it at Q Media. You can get that on your Apple TV. You can get that on your laptop. You can AirPlay it on a screen in a youth group. I would encourage any of you who have children, watch this talk together. Go have a conversation about what is this doing in their hearts when they hear this? Are they hearing this at their schools? Are they hearing this at their church? Let this just be a spark and use it as a leader to ignite and to cast vision and to inspire so that they start to taste and see this is happening. God's on the move. You're not alone if you're feeling it in your heart, but you're not seeing it manifest in the physical sense. You can watch this talk at Q Media. If you're not a subscriber, which again, subscribe. That supports our work. It's $7.99 a month. It helps us continue to do more and more of these conversations, this content. But you can have a free trial for 30 days and go watch this talk, AirPlay it, use it. qideas.org/trial, and you'll get your free 30 days and then get in this journey with us. Continue to share this podcast with others. Share this with your friends. Make this an episode that more and more people are talking about that just starts to ignite in all of us a sense of what God just might be up to in this next generation. And let's be those that are encouraging it, are feeding it, are strengthening it, are resourcing it so that God can do the work that only He can do through those who've made themselves available. Until next week, I hope you're encouraged. I hope you're fired up.